These are, it's an overview of what I'm going to be speaking about today. Selection. How can we have our caladium? Calladiums technically are tubers, not bulbs, but everybody calls them bulbs. But they're really a tuber. How do we get them to last for years? Is that possible? What about dormant care, container kits, some items I've learned about cut caladiums, and then where I buy my bulbs? So we'll start off with selection. Color and height, shade, sun, bulb size, and I'll just touch on the difference between a fancy and a strapped leaf. It's not a big deal to know that, but it can have an advantage. And then lastly, if you plant a mixed caladium bed, keeping some of these factors in mind so that you have the taller caladiums in the back or closer to a tree and the shorter ones in the front can really help. And I'll show some examples. Now, I'm going to take you to a website here. This is really a picture of a website. Happiness Farms is the largest, their other name is Fancy Leaf Calladiums, but Happiness Farms is the largest caladium farm in Lake Placid, and Lake Placid produces 90% of the world's caladiums. Now, when you go to Happiness website, you get the price, you get an overweight. By the way, that's a picture on their website of my garden. Take credit for that. I put it on their Facebook page and they put it on their website. But if you scroll down the page, that's where you get great information. And this is Florida Elise. If you scroll down, it says very tall, upright leaves. That's an important thing to know. Upright leaves, they're not going to be floppy on you. And tall, well, what is tall? If you read the fine print down here, tall is 2 to 2.5 feet. And this takes shade to full sun, and Florida Elise does. You can, if it says shade, it's got to be in the shade. If it says full sun, it can be in the shade. Now this is Candium Junior. There's also a senior. This is upright habit, full and compact, medium. Okay, what's medium? 1.5 feet. So if you're going to plant these two together, you'd want to get the shorty guy out front. And this one says shade to partial sun. So it'll do well in shade. When I see partial sun, I think morning sun, not afternoon sun. Now this is from Bates Sons and Daughters Calladium website. Nice little chart. You'll notice here it says white, and here it says pink. And then it has the names of the caladiums and their sun tolerance. So at a glance, you can see Aaron, and I'll show you some pictures of Aaron. It's a nice tall caladium and it tolerates sun. The one below it is blank, and that's because it's a shade caladium. So this is a shade caladium, White Christmas is a shade caladium, and they have the heights. So they also have white, pink, and they have other pages of red, etc. But this is a nice chart. Someone came to me last night. They had come over to the house and they said, I'm trying to help my sister. She's got a shade area in the front and she wants caladiums. I said, okay, first think height and color and shade. And that's how you want to pick them. Now let's do some application. This is in the ground, obviously, and this is Passionista, beautiful shaped caladium. It's a lance leaf. I'll talk about lance in a minute. I purposely chose it not only for the color, but this is planted with a ginger plant, Cucurma Siam tulip. They bloom, they're both, this is a tuber or a bulb, and this is a rhizome, and they come up around the same time. But I planted them together, and I didn't want Passionista Calladium to tower over and hide that Cucurma. So it was a nice choice, I think, because they're both kind of on the short side. And this is what it looks like in the ground. You can see the Passionista a little bit lower or around the Cucurma at the beginning of the season. Here's another example. This is in Cape Coral at my girlfriend's house. And she did an interesting planting. She's got all the white on this side, but all the whites, she's got like 4 bulbs of one type, one type, one type, one type. And then she's got a clump of the same bulbs, 4 or 5 bulbs in clumps. So you get like these beautiful clusters of the same bulb. It was very interesting planting, I thought. This is my front yard. The smaller planters are over 3 feet. The planter in the back is over 4 feet. Red Flash is a huge caladium, my husband's favorite. It stands 2 feet or a little higher tall. And this is Brandywine, a smaller one. And it's shade, and it's kind of almost tucked under the Red Flash. But Brandywine is another nice part sun, take some shade, but I tried to put them in front of Red Flash. This is another interesting conversation. This was my Christmas card 2 years ago. This is Cranberry Star in the back. And this is Apollo, another cucurma in the ginger family. It's a rhizome. And I thought the color contrast was kind of cool on this. And Cranberry Star stands up behind and above. Apollo's a really short little ginger, but a beautiful red. Okay, these are the same Calladiums, one in the ground and one in the pot. Gingerland has a greenish background with pink veins splattered with red, and then Florida Sweetheart, very similar to Passionista, but a little rounder leaf, is tucked under her. These are two very short Calladiums that kind of hover over the ground, almost like a ground cover. And you can also see the same thing in the planter. I just want to stop and mention what you're seeing in this planter. This is one of those resin planters that I repainted. It's at least 15 years old. But this planter is not filled with soil. What you're seeing is the rim of a metal hanging basket suspended on the pot with bamboo stakes. So I have a metal hanging, rusted old metal hanging planter that I lined with 1 sheet of black trash bag plastic, and I poked holes in it so it retains water and drains slowly, but it does drain. And then I put soil there and I planted the bulbs. Calladiums do not go deep, so you don't need 15 inches of soil and a heavy pot if you don't want it. You could, but this is an alternative way. I actually have more details about this in another presentation I do on lightweight planters, but this is one way to make your planter lighter weight, especially for plants that don't need very deep soil. Okay, what do we have here? Another one of my resin painted pots, because it was beat up looking old. And I have cattail or dwarf chenille in here. And I planted 2 kinds of bulbs in here. I planted cardinal, which is a beautiful, upright, large Calladium. And then I also planted Passionista, which is shorter, and I wanted it to come out underneath. It was really interesting. I planted both bulbs at the same time in this pot, and Passionista came out later. So there's Passionista, a lower height, kind of pulling the cattail together there. That's one of my Hoyas. All right, these are not mine. Cindy, my girlfriend in the neighborhood, did a beautiful job with these, and I thought her pot selection was interesting. Normally, I never buy dark colored pots and put them in the sun. Dark colored pots, I always put in the shade, because to me, if you have a black pot or a dark blue pot, it absorbs a lot of sunlight and it bakes roots. But she has these in the shade. And this is Cranberry Star and Cardinal in a charcoal gray pot that I thought was just so striking with the darker leaf there. This one I thought was incredible. I gave her a cattail, a dwarf cattail, dwarf chenille plant. She put it in a black container, and this is Buck. Buck has this blackish border between the green and the red that makes it dramatic. That's Buck. And with the black pot, the planter, I just thought, I never would have thought of that. but I thought it was just brilliant, so I wanted to show you. Now, can a caladium be brilliant? I don't know, but I think. Now this is mine. This is a white pot I had, and I put buck in with cranberry star. And I put buck in the center and the cranberry star bulbs on the outside. And these are flowers coming up. Calladiums do flower. They're pretty inconspicuous. While I'm on this slide, I'm going to talk more in a minute, a couple of minutes, about this planter caddy that I'm using, a plant stand there. But this is a good picture. You can see the ribs on there. That is so helpful. Not only do these not rust, and they glide like ice with one hand, but because of these ribs, when you have a really big pot, you know when it's centered because you can count how many ribs are there, and you know the big pots, which are sometimes hard to center on these things. But I'll talk more about that later, but I wanted to point that out. So this is the flower of a calladium, and but they are kind of inconspicuous. You know, sometimes you'll miss them and you won't even see them. Sun and shade. This is in my off my front porch, and it's a white calladium with Mona lavender, which is a beautiful shade plant mixed together. And I like combining, we could probably tell I have cucurma and calladiums, and here's Mona lavender and calladiums. I like mixing things up. And I tried to pick a calladium that was a little bit taller or around the same height, so they showed up. Some calladiums absolutely need shade. And if you see a calladium in your garden and the soil's damp and the calladium leaf is getting brown too early, when it first comes up, it's frying, and you got to dig it up and move it, and don't be afraid to dig it up. If you dig up a calladium bulb and you cut it in half, replant it. It'll grow into 2 bulbs for you. Don't worry, don't cry. Sun will tolerate partial sun, and to me that means morning sun. Very few grow in full sun, but they're out there. I'll point them out. Calladiums in sun are obviously going to require more water than calladiums in the shade. And for shady areas, calladiums always add a burst of color. This is a shady area in my yard with some reconditioned pots, and that's cranberry star, and I've got cucurma coming out of them. This is a ground cover called Blew My Mind. It's a new cultivar of blue days, and it lasts several years longer, in my experience, than blue days. And these are some more cucurma coming up here. That's a little cucurma here. Okay. This is against my house with a pygmy palm with some orchids on it. Aaron tolerates sun. This is like a die-hard sun one, and she's a beautiful white. And she's tall. So Aaron's a great sun plant. But spring fling does need shade. This area next to my house faces west, and it gets beastly sun, but this pygmy palm gives just enough shade behind Aaron. It's doing well. So if you're real clear when you're buying exactly, or plant them where you know they're going to do well, and don't be afraid to dig them up if they're not in the right place and move them. On the lanai screening is a wonderful place for calladiums, whether calladiums need shade or sun. I've never had a calladium do badly under a lanai screening. This is one of my favorites. It's a tall, large, upright. It's called Tapestry. Below it is Pink Beauty. And if I can move these faces over here, yes. Over here is Tapestry, the same one as this. This is probably Pink Beauty here, and these are more Cranberry Star. And this is in another area in my yard. But again, I put the tall one, I planted the bulbs in the middle of the large container, and then I planted the shorter Pink Beauty toward the edge of the container to kind of get this effect. This is Florida Elise, takes sun, and Pygmy palms don't offer a tremendous amount of shade, just a little bit, but there's probably 40 bulbs in this bed. And every year I fertilize and the bulbs get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's one of my favorite Calladiums, Florida Elise. We're going to move on to size. Bigger bulbs don't mean that they're taller. Big bulbs just mean more foliage. And the bulb sizes, it's kind of reverse. Number 4 is the tiniest, 3/4 of an inch of a bulb. That's like what you get at Walmart in a bag, and they're real tiny. And then they go all the way up to 2s and 1s. So a number 1 bulb is about 2 inches, 1.5 to 2.5. So a number 1 bulb. Number 2 bulb is around 1 inch, 1.5 inches. And then you've got mammoth and jumbo and super mammoth. Now I want to point out on this jumbo bulb, all a jumbo bulb is big bulbs usually and some little bulbs stuck together. They haven't been broken apart yet. Here's the eye of this bulb where the shoot's going to come out. The hairs are roots. Here's another eye. This might be another eye right here. This is probably an eye. That's probably an eye. So this is a jumbo bulb about 3 inches. This is a number 1 bulb that's about 2 inches. So this jumbo is simply a combination of 2 1s. So when you're looking at prices, if you can get a number 1 bulb for 25 cents, why pay $2 or $3 for a jumbo? You can just buy 3 of these and have 1 of those. Does that make sense? People, a friend of mine said, oh, Sandy, I want to get a mammoth bulb and I want to put it in a big planter. I said, you can do that. It's a number 4. It probably is made up of 4 or 5 jumbos or number 1 bulbs. But if number 1 bulbs are cheaper, go ahead and get 4 of those. You don't need a mammoth. Okay, a little bit more on bulb size. This is a mammoth. Is that a serious bulb there? This is an eye. This is an eye. This is an eye. That's probably an eye. That's an eye. So we've got 1, 2, 3. I think that's another one. 4, maybe 5, 6 eyes. There are 6 eyes in this 4-inch, maybe even a super mammoth bulb. And so if somebody wants to charge you $5 for a mammoth and their jumbos or 1-inch or 2-inch bulbs are a lot cheaper, you can go with the smaller bulb and be getting even more for your money. Again, the DNA of the Calladium gives you the height. The size of the bulb just gives you more shoots, more foliage. I'm going to mention fancy leaf. If this confuses you, ignore it, but it can be helpful, and I'll explain in a minute why. Fancy leaf Calladiums are in general where the stem is attached to is within the leaf. The stem is within the leaf. The strap leaf is where the stem is at the edge of the leaf. So you have to look at the back of the leaf and say to yourself, okay, it's a fancy leaf, it's within, inside, it's a strap leaf. And why does this matter? They have slightly different growth styles. Fancy leaf tend to be heart-shaped, they develop fast, they're taller, they're less cold tolerant, they're more upright. Strap leaf are more sun tolerant, last longer in the landscape. I'm going to go over this in a little more detail, but not much. Those of you that say, oh, I want to learn this, this is important. This is one place you can go. Write down classic Calladiums. Just type in classic Calladiums on your website, and you will get this page where they describe the difference between the two. Classic Calladiums. Just Google that. You don't need the website. You'll find the website with classic Calladiums. And I want to point out, I see these people's pictures here, and I got to get them out of the way. Okay. Fancy leaf, the one where the stem is within the leaf, They tend to be less sun tolerant, develop fast. They're less cold tolerant. Their highest yields, and they're the least costly. They tend to be taller, and they have a more upright habit. And whereas lance, where the stem is on the edge of the leaf, they're usually smaller, they're more sun tolerant, they're cold tolerant, they last a little longer in the landscape. They have longer crop times in your yard. They have lower yields than the tuber, and so they're more expensive on the market. So why do I even mention this? People give me Calladiums sometimes, and I don't know the name of it, but I can look at the back of the leaf, and I can see whether it's a fancy leaf or a strap leaf. Even if I don't know the name of the Calladium, I have a better idea of learning about that leaf. Even if I never identify that specific name, oh, that's a strap leaf. It's going to be shorter, more cold tolerant, last longer in the landscape. So it's just some thoughts. Okay. I'm going to look at how do you plant for years and keep these bulbs in the landscape going and going and not dying out. I'll tell you a story. First time I did Calladiums here in Florida like a fool, and I had done them in California, I'd done them in New Jersey, did them in Colorado. I came here and I have this garbagey, sandy, rocky limestone soil in Fort Myers. And I buy these beautiful white Calladiums, put them in the shade because they're shade ones. They came up great for a year. The next year, 50%. The year after that, I don't think I have one left. Calladiums love rich soil. And I'll show you how they grow in the Calladium fields, but they love rich soil, and it's really, really important. Calladiums came from the Amazon. And you can think of the Amazon with all that dead foliage building up over millennium in this rich, humid, hot environment. That's where Calladiums came from and where their normal environment is. And I'm going to tell you a story about Grandmother Bates. Bates Sons and Daughters Calladium Farm is a big farm, and I've been there many times up in Lake Placid. And I went on the Calladium Festival tour many years ago. And on the tour, when you go, there's a lecture and a bus tour. And the speaker on the bus tour was one of the owners of Bates Calladiums. And she told a story about her grandmother. And her grandmother, she said, had Calladium bulbs for 65 years. And she planted them in rich, rich, mucky soil. And just like in the Amazon. And she'd fertilize them at the beginning of the season when they come up, and then mid-season, June or July. And her grandmother's bulbs grew bigger and bigger, had baby bulbs along the sides, and they lasted a very, very long time. And I never forgot that. So I thought that story would be a great story to tell. So this is what the Bates grandmother said. If you have poor soil, your bulbs are going to last about 2 seasons. If you have excellent rich soil and you fertilize at the beginning and then mid-season, your bulbs are going to last for years. Then the Bates speaker, owner on the tour said, and if you planted poor soil, that's good for us because you're just going to keep buying bulbs every year. So there you have it. Now, this is a Calladium field in Lake Placid. You don't see that kind of soil in Fort Myers and Cape Coral. That's because this area, millennia ago, was a lake. This is rich lake bottom soil, and that soil is 30 feet deep. And the reason I know that is I spoke to the owner of Happiness Farms. I actually was up there last Tuesday. And I talked to Danelle and I said, what can I tell them at the meeting that they don't already know about Calladiums? And she said, tell them that that black, beautiful soil is like that 30 feet deep. And that's why we grow 90% of the world's Calladiums. So that's from Danelle just for you today. All right, so your choices are to put it in the lousy soil and buy new bulbs every 2 years, or to amend your soil with some really good homemade compost or commercially purchased compost. And you might all know this, and I don't want to bore you, but I want to make an important point about the difference between commercial compost and commercial topsoil. Topsoil has weed seeds. Commercial compost has been heated to 130 degrees for 8 months, and the weed seeds are killed. And commercial compost is just a few bucks more than commercial topsoil. So you can either amend the area where you're planting, or I have a little over 2 acres, so I'm always building new beds, slowly getting rid of my grass or weeds. Now, this is an area where I had just killed off a whole bunch of macho ferns in here, and I got commercial compost delivered, and then I spread it out. So this is commercial compost. I'm covering it with a cardboard, then I'm going to cover it with Melaleuca mulch. That cardboard in 6 months is going to be rotted, but in 3 weeks is going to be wet and easy to peel back and plant on. That's how I build beds. And I'll show you a few quick questions. Oh, by the way, these are some Calladiums coming up in here and a lot of cucumber. And I'll show you some pictures when the area is in bloom. This is Blew My Mind ground cover here. Okay, this is approximately 4 yards of compost. So I just wanted you to get an idea if you need compost or you want compost, what 4 yards of compost getting delivered looks like. Can't see in this picture, but there was steam coming off this because I mentioned compost is heated to 130 degrees. This is my backyard. This is yesterday, today, and tomorrow. This here is a bougainvillea, and this is a bougainvillea torch glow. It's an upright bougainvillea. See the upright form. This is my token banyan tree. It's a mahogany. This is tiger bark ficus back here. All right. Next item. How do you plant? What's the best way to plant? The quickest way to plant, the most efficient, and hopefully to last for years. You want to plant eyes up, which is the eyes are where the leaves come up, the shoots come up, about 7 to 8 inches apart in the ground. You could put them closer in pots. You want to cover them with only 1.5 inches of soil, and then cover that with some mulch. What you can do, if you're not in the mood to dig, you can just lay your bulbs on the ground, eyes up, and cover with 2 to 3 inches of mulch. It won't be as good as putting them in the soil. You might have to water them a little more, but if you want to cheat, you can try that and see how it works out for you. Because a lot of time, mulch just rots to nice soil.
Mm-hmm.
Which side is up? Calladiums have a top and a bottom. So this is a bulb, and right here, that's an eye. That's the top where the shoot's going to come out. Here's where the shoot's going to come out. Here's a shoot. Here's a shoot. This is probably a shoot. That's probably a shoot. Maybe a little bulb here. The top side looks hairy because that's where the roots are, and the top side has roots and new shoots. So you want to plant with the knobby side up and the hairy side up. The bottom is usually flat and bald. If you've got a bulb and all the hair is fallen off, all the roots have fallen off, and it looks bald on both sides, don't worry. If you plant it upside down, it'll find right side up. It'll just take a little longer to find its way out of the soil, but it will come up correctly just a little later. Moisture and fertilizer. This is that area where I have Aran and Spring Fling, and you want to keep your soil damp, not soaking. If you have an area in your yard during the summer when it's wet, it stays wet for 2, 3, 4 weeks, sopping wet, those bulbs will rot. Soggy soil will rot the bulbs. And you want to lightly fertilize them when they first come up and they get in spring. I use Osmocote, but any 666 slow release fertilizer works. Any 666 slow release, I happen to use Osmocote, but you want to do it when they first stick their heads up, like right now, if you see them coming up, and then mid-season. Temperature. Calladiums need warm weather to sprout. When you go in the literature, it says the ground needs to be 70 degrees. In my experience here in Florida, when the nighttime temperature is 60, that's when they really kick butt and start coming out of the soil. Vicki, some of you know Vicki Williamson, she was over here last night. She said, Sandy, they're not coming up, they're not coming up. I've got 3 or 4 coming up. I said, don't worry, it's still chilly out. Cooler weather delays sprouting. Give it another 3 weeks. Once it hits 60 at night, they're just gonna get cranked. Dormant care. Make some comments for snowbirds. I have friends who are snowbirds and they buy the Calladiums, they drive up to Lake Placid, pick up the Calladiums, great big Calladiums, and then fly home for the summer, plant them in May. And then the question is, what do you do in the fall? Well, up north or anywhere where it's cold, you have 3 choices. You can leave them in the ground, let them rot, and buy new ones. The next option is dig them up before the first frost, leave the leaves on, shake off most of the soil, put them in a paper bag or a mesh bag, and they should stay at 65 to 70 degrees. Don't let them freeze. The other option is to plant your bulbs in a nursery pot, a cheap nursery pot, sink it in the ground, and then before the first frost, pull that pot up out of the ground, wipe off the pot, put it in a paper bag, and store it at 60 to 70 degrees. So this is an option for up north. What about down here? Well, in our zones, I let the leaves die back, and I don't dig them up. I mean, you don't need to down here because we don't have frost. The ground, we may have occasional frost above ground, but we really don't have frost below ground. And
the bush on the left is a Panama rose in bloom, and I've got some orchids in bloom. The Calladiums are still up. I have no idea why. Not all of them, but quite a few of the Calladiums are still up. I've got some orchids that are fading right now, but I've got some Vandas that are about to bloom. There's a little bud on this one. It's a beautiful red when it comes out. And here's some more Calladiums up in December. It's amazing.
Now I'm going to show you a picture of what this looks like in the non-dormant season. This is a sheltered area. It's in the front yard next to the wall of the house in a corner. So I think that's why the Calladium stayed up a little longer. It was sheltered. This is what this area looked like when the Calladiums were up. The Siam tulips were up. This is a Siam tulip by the name of Mammy Siam. And so I can get this. I don't know if you see people's faces down below here, but it's in my way. I can't get rid of it. But anyway, this is Mammy Siam. This is that orchid that turned red that I said was a Vanda. And so it's really got mixed shade and sun and the non-dormant season. This is my front yard at the curb with Blew My Mind here. Over 300 Calladium bulbs in this bed, and over 350 ginger cucurma Siam tulips that are rhizomes in this bed. Since this photo was taken, I got rid of all these macho ferns. This is the willow, this is a sago palm, and I got rid of this cute, taller cucurma here. But I want to show you a picture of what it looks like in the dormant season, which I just took a couple of weeks ago. This is where the macho ferns were. I ripped them out, and I'm putting a Calladium bed under this willow that's in its dormant. This is the sago palm. I tore out some of the Blew My Minds because they had been invaded with weeds. I'm going to replant them, but I'm going to wait till the Calladiums and the cucurma come up so I don't clobber them. And then I'll put some more of the Blew My Mind in. These little guys are the native pink salvia. And this is a taller pink salvia back back here. But this is what she looks like in the dormant season. Going to move on to container tips. Again, you want to plant in good, rich soil, well-drained soil. You don't want it to dry out. You know how planters can dry out so much more quickly than in the ground. Use mulch if you want. Under lanai screening is perfect for caladiums. This is another huge pot. This is like 3 feet across, but in here, it is not filled with soil. It has a rusted old hanging planter suspended on bamboo, lined with a sheet of plastic with some pinholes in it. And the caladiums are planted in a pot that's no longer, that in that basket that's no more than 6, 7 inches deep. I use about 20%, 30% is okay too, of perlite. These are the bulbs coming up, and I put a lot of bulbs in, and there's no liner here. This is just a small pot. And I put a lot of bulbs, maybe 2 inches apart, not like I do in the soil, 6 or 7 inches apart. And because I really want a full pot. Perlite's a volcanic glass. It absorbs almost no water. It's great for root health. It aerates the soil. It also makes your pots and the soil lighter weight, so they're easier to move around. I love perlite. Another thing I really like adding is coconut coir. It's a renewable resource. It looks like peat moss, but I think it's better than peat moss. It's a natural fiber from the husk of coconut, great drainage. It retains water well. And what's really best about it, it hydrates so much more easily than peat moss. Have you ever had a planter that has peat moss in it? You put water in and it just runs through? Coconut coir is not like this. You put water on it and boom, it absorbs it. It can be totally dried out, and it comes in bricks like this. I get mine on Amazon. And how I hydrate it is, if I want a whole bunch of it, I put it in a barrel or a bucket and I pour water on it and it fluffs up and I use it. The other way to do it is I'll take a bowl or a bucket and I'll stick 1/4 corner in, add water, and then only the corner starts fluffing up, and I'll just take a few cups or 3 cups that I need. But 1 brick will fill almost a half wheelbarrow.
Wow.
Another thing I love added to planters, how many of you have ever heard of soil moist? Okay, a couple of you. Soil moist is a crystal. It's a hard crystal. It comes in, I buy it in big containers because it's so much cheaper. But it absorbs 100 times its weight in water. And when you add it to planters, it slowly releases water into the soil so you don't have to water so frequently. You know there's times when it's hot here, you almost have to water twice a day some of your planters. And this prevents needing to water so frequently. Soil moist is an agropolymer. It was developed for farmers. It absorbs like a sponge. It's totally biodegradable and non-toxic. It doubles the water retained by soil. The crystals absorb 100 times their weight. What's really important is to hydrate the crystals before you add it to the soil in the pot. The reason is, if you just add the little tiny crystals to your soil, say you add a teaspoon, which is maybe what you use in a big planter. If you add it too much and then you add water, your soil will start boiling, not literally boiling, but will start flowing out of the pot like a volcano. So it's really, really, really important to hydrate those crystals before you add them to the soil. Put a teaspoon in a container and keep adding water until those big, soft, gel-like crystals are floating in water and they don't absorb anything anymore. Then you know they're ready to use. Okay, some containers. All these 3 containers are different sizes, different weights. And I just want to mention the planters I'm using. About 7 years ago, I gave up on those metal planters that rust. They get hard to move. the wheels don't work, you spend money, you're buying a new one every 2 or 3 or 4 years. And I found these online, and I'll just mention these because I think they're a little miracle. Big, big planters I can move with one hand, and it's like ice on the lanai. They're wonderful. This particular planter, it comes in many sizes. I always buy the biggest planter because it's more flexible. I can use it with small pots and I can use it with big pots. So I buy the bigger size, which is a little more expensive, but it's more flexible when I'm changing pot sizes. And these are so easy to move. And I have them, they're 7 years old and they still move very, very easily. One of the particular, I'm trying to, I see these pictures.
Excuse me, Sandy, we're almost at our time, so if you
I'll
can.
keep moving quickly. This is the name of the planter on Amazon, Down Under Plant Caddy. The other thing nice about it is the markings, and you've got to have the hole for the pot centered or it's going to plug up. See, where do I want to go now? Well, I have cut caladiums and I have vine bulbs in Lake Placid. Which one do you want?
Let's do cut caladiums.
Yeah, okay.
I cut when they're mature. I cut them in the morning. Some will last over a week cut. Initially, some caladiums will flop over. And then within a few hours, they perk up. If they haven't perked up in 8 hours, cut a new leaf. These are the pink leaves you just saw flopped over, and in 3 hours, they perked up. I'm just going to whip through these pictures.
Mm.
I want to mention this. I love this little thing. I am not a floral designer. I do cut tricks. This is Easy Arranger. It's a metal frame. You can bend it. It's reusable. What I love about it is when you put the flowers in, you can change the water. You lift it up and the flowers stay in place.
Oh, how nice. Yeah.
Let me show you. Easy Arranger. That's the name on Amazon. It's, not a professional floral thing, but I love it because it's fast, easy, and it works for me. This is the back view of this caladium arrangement. And for the life of me, I couldn't get this leaf. This is the back side. I couldn't get the leaf to go forward no matter what I did. So I've successfully used 30 gauge on caladiums occasionally. That's the end of cut caladiums. I think the only, I'm going to just show you. This is where I go in Lake Placid. I go to Bates Sons and Daughters. I was there last Tuesday, and Happiness Farms. Those are the two best places. They have shops, great prices, $10 for a dozen caladiums or $7 for caladiums. Then I go for lunch at Dock 33 or Jackson up the road. And I can't tell you how wonderful they are there. This is Happiness Farm shop where you can pick out any bulb you want out of the barrel. So you pick your own, you can pick the biggest sizes. It's got a cute little shop. And they have boxes of mixed caladiums for $45. And we counted them, 284 in a box. That made 16 cents a caladium bulb. And this is my friend Carol picking, and that's her caladiums on her front porch in a pot.
Beautiful.
And this is, I'll just show you Bates Shed. This is Bates Shed where you pick them out of the box, and it's on the honor system. And they're huge, huge this year. Honor box, you pay on the honor box.